Everyone, my name is Jay. Welcome to Cafe Oleh. I'm a volunteer with Nefesh B'Nefesh. I myself made Aliyah with Nefesh B'Nefesh, and here at Cafe Oleh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need in Israel to survive and succeed, whether that's reading your utility bills, going grocery shopping and reading food labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation about anything, how to flirt, how to argue, all the everyday conversations and topics you and your respective countries of origin would engage in. And here in Israel, you should be able to know less. We focus more on intro level as we really want to get you feeling more comfortable using Hebrew and accessing Hebrew also in a way that you may not be learning in Ulpan or have learned in the past in university or yeshiva or in high school or even previous trips to Israel. So we also focus a lot on cultural context and maybe some shortcuts and helpful hints when you're here in Israel and even before you make Aliyah. So today's topic is one of my favorite, and I know one of yours, media literacy, how to read and keep up with the news here in Israel. As you know, we've talked about this a lot. The news, things happen fast here in Israel. The line goes, I think that's from Ferris Bueller in the 80s. Life moves at you fast, that's the line. And here in Israel is no less the case. It's even faster here in many ways. The news is regularly updated at the top of the hour, if not every 30 minutes, if not even more. People listen religiously to updates on the news on the radio, as well as on TV and online. And as we've discussed before, English language media that comes out of Israel is not primarily for a local audience. It's primarily for people abroad. And I know this because breaking news that happens in Israel in Hebrew takes many hours to be translated into English. And even then, the top stories of the news in Hebrew aren't going to make news in English. I'll give you a great example. One of the big headlines from today was the unfortunate discovery of the body of a missing woman who's been searched for the last week. That's been a big news here. Remember, this is a small country. So things like robberies and domestic abuse and crime on this level, in this case, the disappearance of a woman, makes national headlines. This was national news for the last week. It was the blaring news when they unfortunately made the discovery and confirmed it was her. That barely made a dent in English language media, again, because if you're living elsewhere in the world, that's not as relevant, and if both for immediacy, but also because what is relevant to an Israeli living in Israel. We're going to look at a different source today. We've only looked at a little bit in the past, but we're going to go a deep in depth into. And I'm going to open it up now so we can get started with it. I need to actually open up two things at the same time, and you'll see why in a second. Yeah. Share. Okay, great. On the right-hand side of the page, you're going to see two things. Our vocab sheet on the side, on the left side, as we always have. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see something called Hadshon. Hadshon, before actually I get into Hadshon, a quick housekeeping item. If you have any questions as I'm talking, as you see, I'm getting right into it. Please write that in the Q&A box in the Zoom menu above. Any other questions, comments, topics you'd like us to cover in the future, please write in the chat window. But Q&A is only for this class. I'm only going to be looking at the Q&A box as I finish up this class. Anyways, let's get back to this. Hadshon. Hadshon comes from the word chadashot. Chadashot in modern Hebrew means news, like the news. Chadash means new, N-E-W, like an adjective. Hadshon, that on at the end, we've talked about this before, is the diminutive. It makes something small. So Yeled is a boy, Yaldon, a little boy or a little child. In this case, Hadshon, the little news. And you'll see why in a second. Be'ivrit kala, as it says here on the top. Hadshon, it's the name of the publication. Be'ivrit kala, in easy Hebrew. This is a news publication put out by Misrad HaChinuch, by the Israeli Ministry of Education. This is not commercial news like we normally look at. This is not public broadcasting news like we've also looked at Khan. This is government news, but this is made for Hebrew learners. It's an easy Hebrew, as it says, and there's even a children's edition. We're looking at the adult edition. And every morning, they put out a new edition of this where they go through the top stories of the previous day and the expected top stories of the next day. They put together the headlines, and we're going to go through this together. At the end, they record it, and the woman who's the narrator, the announcer, is speaking very slowly. We're actually going to listen to it in just a minute so you can hear how slow it is. And on either side of the page, there's some really useful information. So for example, it's cut off right now, but when you go to this website, and by the way, you can see it here, it is hadshon.edu.gov.il. We'll put it in the YouTube recording of this when it goes up in the next 1 to 2 days. This is a great website, and it gives you not only this, it gives you also, it goes through the top headlines, and then it does its own audio recording of it, and it's a small blurb, and then in that it gives you vocab words, and there's also vocab words on the right hand side. It gives you highlighted, and it'll give you the definition. It also has past recordings, it has sayings. This is a really good resource for not just keeping up with the news, but also keeping up with your vocabulary. This is not going to be breaking news. Like if something happens in the middle of the day, forget about going to this website. This is a summary of what's happened and what's expected to happen in the next day. This is not breaking news. This is to help your Hebrew. This is great for those of you who are not news junkies like myself and many other Israelis. If you just want to be aware of what's going on without being too overwhelmed by it, this is your website. It's also, the Hebrew really is easy Hebrew. It goes through more complicated words together, which we're going to do. I highly recommend you go to this website after we're done learning today, and there will be a recording of this. This actual broadcast that's from today, you'll be able to see later. And actually, when you go into the top headlines on the left-hand side of the page, it not only gives you the vocab, it tells you what previous broadcast that same word was used, so you can reference it again. It's a really great Hebrew resource. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the recording of it now. I hope you can listen, and if not, I'm going to try to highlight as the words go so you can follow along together. Even if you can't read the Hebrew yet, we're going to go through the Hebrew together. You're going to listen to how she pronounces it. This is not everyday Hebrew. Very understood when, just like in other countries, certainly I know this in the US, many of you know this in the UK, that news correspondents, newscasters, radio announcers are speaking in a more polished form of their language. Hebrew is very famous for that radio announcers and the people who read the news have a slightly different accent when they read it and how they pronounce things. It's very both erudite and very much succinct and very nuanced in a way that we don't speak in everyday Hebrew. So pay attention to how she's pronouncing things. This is how you're going to listen to the news on TV and on radio, as opposed to necessarily talk about it. Okay, so I'm going to play it, and we're going to follow along from the top.
בוקר טוב, היום יום שני, י"ד בסיוון תשפ"ב, 13 ביוני 2022. הנה הכותרות. הותר לפרסום, סוכל ניסיון פיגוע איראני בישראלים בטורקיה לפני כחודש. המטה למלחמה בטרור, קיים עדיין איום על ישראלים בטורקיה ובמדינות הקרובות לאיראן. העיצומים במערכת החינוך. הלימודים במחוז חיפה, בגני הילדים, בבתי הספר היסודיים ובחטיבות הביניים, יתחילו הבוקר בשעה 10. החינוך המיוחד במחוז חיפה יפעל כסדרו. הבוקר עד 8:30, שביתה של נהגי אוטובוסים באזור ירושלים, בצפון ובבאר שבע. היום יום הולדת. היום לפני שנה, ב-13 ביוני 2021, זכתה ממשלת בנט-לפיד לאמון הכנסת. שרי השיכון, האוצר והפנים הציגו אתמול תוכנית שמטרתה טיפול במשבר הדיור והורדת מחירי הדירות. הנשיא ביידן צפוי לבקר בישראל ככל הנראה ב-14 ביולי. אוקראינה, המלחמה נמשכת ולא רואים את הסוף. מגפת הקורונה בישראל, מקדם ההדבקה, ה-R, עלה ל-1.44. תוצאות ראשונות של מחקר בשיבא. מי שחלה באומיקרון וגם חוסן מפני קורונה, מוגן יותר מפני הזן החדש. משרד הבריאות ממליץ למבוגרים ולאוכלוסיות בסיכון לעטות מסכות בחללים סגורים ובהתקהלויות. התחזית, ירידה בטמפרטורות. עד כאן כותרות הבוקר בחדשון. בוקר טוב ויום נעים ושקט.
Okay, so as you heard, it's a very soft voice. It's a very nuanced voice, and it's a really nice way to it's the way that all broadcasters speak. The only difference here was that she was speaking much more slowly, and for good reason. As you see, these are the headlines from 6 in the morning, according to Hadshon. These are the ones that they picked to cover. So as you heard, she starts off with Boker Tov because it's from 6:10 in the morning. She reads out the name of the date of today, both the Hebrew calendar and the Gregorian one, and then she goes through each of them. We're going to go through these together. I didn't write out all the vocab for good reason. Some of these we've done before. Some of these were just not. You're not going to come over quite often. But the point is that we understand a little bit of how the news works, and we're able to read it together. So let me just make sure that we can see it. Okay, so let's start with the first one. הותר לפרסום, סוכל ניסיון פיגוע איראני בישראלים בטורקיה לפני כחודש. Okay, so as you see here on Hadshon's website, they put in the dots and bars called nikud, the vowel sounds that are indicated by dots and bars on the words they want you to know, particularly in words that they expect you know. Learning Hebrew, you're not necessarily going to know, much less how to pronounce, because some of them can be pronounced different ways if you don't know the word well enough. So the first one, hutar lepilsum, or hutar lefilsum in correct Hebrew. If you look here on the left, that's our first one here, hutar lefilsum. Right, hutar lefilsum translates best as permitted to be published or permitted for publication. Okay, hutar, as you see here also in the brackets, is the passive past tense of the verb to permit. And lefilsum, pilsum, is the act of publishing something or publicizing something. Lefarsem is to publish. It also could be to advertise. Pilsum is an advertisement, the act of advertising. Hutar. This is an important thing we've talked about every time we talk about media literacy, and it needs to be pronounced. It needs to be said again. Hebrew in general loves the passive tense. I have gone. Not I've gone. I was gone. The book was written. The publication was permitted in this case, okay? Hebrew loves the passive tense. To be something ed is usually how we say this in English. In English, it's considered bad English. In Hebrew, it's considered really good Hebrew. And in news, media Hebrew, it's used all the time. Why? Because in this one word, we're able to communicate many, many things at once. That, for example, in English, right, it's 3 words. The news, the publication was permitted. Publication was permitted, right? In Hebrew, all of that was permitted is only one word, hutar. Okay, hutar is the past tense. You've probably heard the present tense, which is mutar with a mem, but hutar lefilsum, it has been permitted for publication. Right? It has already cleared it in the past or just recently, and now it's able to be published. Okay, so what was published? Sukal nisayon pigua Irani b'Yisraelim beTurkia. Sukal is another passive tense verb, and that's why it's also added the vowel sounds here to ensure the dots and the bars, making sure that you pronounce it as sukal. And when you get to a higher level of Hebrew, you'll know the binyanim, the structures that we use to create verbs. You'll know this is a passive tense. This is called pu'al. But sukal is the passive form of sikel. And sikel or lisakel means to thwart. Okay, so sukal, something was thwarted. What was thwarted? Nisayon pigua. Okay, so remember also in very fancy Hebrew, as opposed to modern Hebrew, everyday modern Hebrew, the order of words is not like in English, right? In English, we would say the nisayon pigua, the attempted pigua, the attempted terrorist attack was thwarted. Okay, so the subject, object, subject, verb, then object. Subject in this case is nisayon pigua, attempted terrorist attack, and then the verb would be was thwarted. In Hebrew, those of you who know Tanakh and Torah, the Hebrew Bible well enough, you know that more often than not, it's verb, subject, object, that the verb comes first. As you see here, oftentimes this is the case with passive sentences as well. So it begins with the verb, not with the subject. Sukal nisayon pigua. The nisayon pigua was sukal, is how you can think about it in English. Nisayon pigua, nisayon is a trial or an attempt. Pigua is a terrorist attack. So the attempt of a terrorist attack was thwarted, but what kind of terrorist attack? Nisayon pigua Irani be-Yisraelim be-Turkey. A terrorist attack attempt, an Iranian one, on Israelis be-Turkey, in Turkey, was thwarted, sukal, lifnei kechodesh. So let's translate up into those last two words. Sukal nisayon pigua Irani bi-Israel be-Turkey. Sukal nisayon pigua, a terrorist attack, an Iranian terrorist attack attempt against Israelis in Turkey, or Turkey as you're supposed to say it now, was thwarted. Lifnei kechodesh, approximately a month ago. Lifnei ke is our next very important phrase here on the left-hand side. Okay, lifnei ke. Lifnei ke is a really good expression, time expression that you're going to see a lot in the news, and it translates best to about a blank ago. Lifnei means before, and this is what we use when we want to say before something, meaning ago in English. But the ke is important here. Ke normally translates to like or as. It's the shortened prefix of kimo, which means like or as. When we add ke at the beginning of a word, it means like or as. It's just a contraction of it. It makes things easier. Because remember, Hebrew, we like small words. Lifnei ke, this construction means about or approximately a blank period of time ago. In this case, lifnei kechodesh, approximately a month ago. Remember that this news is now being permitted for publication. So there's probably some details we don't know yet. And even if we did know the details, maybe it's not so relevant to know exactly what day this was thwarted. We also don't want to necessarily show our hands as the intelligence community to give that up. So lifnei kechodesh gives us approximately or about a month ago, a Iranian terrorist attack attempt against Israelis in Turkey was thwarted. Okay, and now that has been hutar lefirsum. It has now been allowed for publication. Permitted or allowed, hutar, publication, lefirsum. Okay, that is all that information, which is a huge amount of information in one line, often thanks to those two passive verbs, hutar and sukal. And you can even hear it in the sound. When verbs sound like that, u, ah, chances are it's a passive verb. Even if you don't know what it means, you know that it's going to be passive. Let's keep going. Hamalal. Kayam adayin iyum al Yisraelim beTurkיה ובמדינות הקרובות לאיראן. Hamalal, as you heard in the newscaster read out the whole name of Malal. Malal stands for Hamate Lelochama Terror. You don't need to know that. Hamalal stands for the counterterrorism office or headquarters in Israel. Okay, and this is what puts out regular announcements to civilians and to Israelis abroad where they should and should not travel to. And it says here, Kayam adain iyum al Yisraelim beTurkia. Okay, kayam. Kayam is our next word here. This is a word you're going to hear all the time in the news. We use this all the time. Kayam means existing, or it's present, or it's a way in English we would say there is, right? Because it's followed by something else. Kayam is always followed by something else in this context. In this case, kayam adain iyum. Adain means still. Iyum, threat, right? So even if I took out the adain, the kayam and iyum are what are connected together. Still is, you can think of as an adverb or as an adjective in this case, because it's making sure it's not just that the threat exists, it's that it still exists, right? It's just emphasizing the point. Kayam adain iyum, a threat still exists. Iyum, threat. Kayam, exist. Adain, still. Al Yisraelim beTurkia, for Israelis, Israeli citizens in Turkey. Uvamdinot hakrovot leIran, and in countries krovot, close to Iran. Okay, so this is the whole, again, kayam here is the verb. It's not passive, but it starts off the sentence. Again, very classic Hebrew, that's how it works. The verb is at the beginning, and then comes the subject. So kayam adain iyum, right? If I was saying this in everyday Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, I could say ha'iyum al Yisraelim beTurkia adain kayam. That would be everyday Hebrew if I was just saying a declarative statement. The threat against Israelis in Turkey still exists. But we're speaking in news Hebrew, just like news English sounds different in other countries as well. Kayam adain iyum, the still existing threat on Israelis in Turkey and neighboring countries to Iran. Remember that Israelis love to travel. There are many countries around Iran that Israelis are allowed to go to and also enjoy go to, like Azerbaijan, like Turkey, like Georgia, like Armenia, like the Gulf states, so forth. Okay, next one. העיצומים במערכת החינוך. הלימודים במחוז חיפה בגני הילדים, בבתי הספר היסודיים, ובחטיבות הביניים יתחילו הבוקר בשעה 10. Okay, the only word I took out of here that you're going to hear more often than just in this one context is itzumim, our next word. Itzumim is here translated as sanctions. In a geopolitical and diplomatic context, it's sanctions, like sanctions against a country, like sanctions against Russia. In this case, itzumim goes with one of the words we're going to get a little bit down, shvita, strike. In this case, itzumim is like a work dispute or something just short of a general strike by workers in a given labor field or in a given company. So itzumim you can think of as go slow. You can think of it as work sanctions or labor sanctions, right? And that's what they're talking about here. Itzumim b'ma'arechet achinuch. The sanctions or the labor sanctions b'ma'arechet achinuch, in the educational system. Ma'arechet is a system, chinuch, education. So the combination of these two nouns together brings you the education system. And it's talking about the national system, meaning state schools. הלימודים במחוז חיפה בגני הילדים בבתי הספר יסודיים ובחטיבות הביניים יתחילו הבוקר בשעה 10. So if you've been keeping up with the news, you know that the National Teachers Union is engaged in itzumim, in labor sanctions, protesting their objectively very paltry salary and wage conditions, and as such, they are staggering out itzumim, these labor sanctions, throughout the country in different mechozot. This word here, mechoz. Mechoz is a district in Hebrew. Now, in Israel, we have a couple different ways to chop up the country. We've done this lesson before about the geography of Israel. One is by mechozot. Usually mechozot, when we talk about districts, we're talking about judicial districts, in which case Israel is chopped up into 6 judicial districts. Mechoz Haifa means not just the Haifa district, it means everything that's in it. So all the surrounding towns, cities and villages to Haifa, not just the town itself, the city itself rather, but all of the limudim, studies or classes in the Mechoz Haifa, in the Haifa district, Beganei HaYeladim, okay, so in the kindergartens, Batei HaSefer HaYesudim, elementary schools or primary schools, Uvechativat HaBeinayim, middle schools, Yatchilu will start, Haboker B'Sha'a 10, that school will start in the Haifa district in the kindergartens, primary, and middle schools at 10 o'clock. Okay. If you are a parent, you would have already gotten 500 WhatsApp messages from your various parents groups about this, but this is also national news. Chinuch HaMiyuchad B'Mchoz Haifa Yif'al Kisidro. This is the next part that's still connected with the same story because it's important. Chinuch HaMiyuchad. So chinuch, we just said, was education. Miyuchad means special. So Chinuch HaMiyuchad, special education. Same thing in Israel like it is in other countries. Children who need extra help in school for various cognitive issues. Special education has their own tracks within public education. So Chinuch HaMiyuchad B'Mchoz Haifa, the special education tracks in the Haifa district, Yif'al Kisidro. This is our next vocab word. This is very fancy Hebrew, but it's a nice one to have under your belt. Yif'al Kisidro. Yif'al comes from the verb lif'ol, to operate or to work. In this case, it's the future tense because it's talking about Chinuch HaMiyuchad. When will the special education be affected, if at all? Yif'al Kisidro. This is an expression together, which translates best as will operate as usual. Literally translates to will work or will operate as its order, as its own order. Sidro, kesidro is made up of 3 different components. Again, Hebrew is wonderful at being so condensed and so conservative and pack in so much meaning in one word. Kesidro. Ke, as we just said before, means as or like at the beginning of a word, in this case as. Seder means order. Right? Samech Daled Resh, you all know that from the Seder, Leila Seder on Passover night. Ke Sidra O. In this case, Kimo HaSeder Shelo. That O at the end indicates Shelo. It's the abbreviation for Shelo, meaning it's masculine. So it will operate, Chinuch HaMiyuchad, the special education will work or operate, Kimo HaSeder Shelo, as usual. Okay, Yif'al Kisidro. If the word that we were talking about was feminine, it would say Tif'al Kisidra, right? Not just the word Kisidra would be changed and would go from O to A, but the verb that refers to it would also change because it's feminine. Remember, Hebrew is a gendered language. This is a very important distinction. Chinuch HaMiyuchad Yif'al Kisidro. Okay, if it was feminine, let's say the word ma'arechet that we just had, system. Ha-ma'arechet tif'al kesidra. That would be how you would say it for a feminine word. The system will operate as usual. In this case, Chinuch HaMiyuchad yif'al kesidro. The special education tracks will operate as usual. Okay. All right, next word. Haboker at 8:30, or she said 8:30, but 8:30 is perfectly all right how to say 8:30 in the morning. Haboker at 8:30, שביתה של נהגי אוטובוסים באזור ירושלים, בצפון ובאר שבע. Okay, so we talked about itzumim, labor sanctions. When you ratchet it up to its full effect, you get a shvita. Shvita is a strike. Not a strike like on someone's head or on someone's body, but a strike as in a labor strike, right? It's from the same root as Shabbat, this idea of full cessation of work. Lishbot means to strike. Shvita is a strike. So what's it talking about? Shvita, haboker ad 8:30. So this morning, meaning today, until 8:30 in the morning, Shvita shel nahagei otobusim, a strike of or by Nahage otobusim. Nahag is a bus driver. Otobusim, buses. Nahag, excuse me, is just a driver of anything, but it's now Nahag otobusim. So bus drivers, Nahage otobusim. Be'ezor Yerushalayim, Batzafon uver Sheva. Right? So a strike until 8:30 by bus drivers in the areas of Jerusalem, in the north, and in Beersheba. Okay, also about wage disputes. Okay, let's move down. Here we go. Hayom Yom Huledet. Hayom Lifnei Shana, ב-13 ביוני 2021, זכתה ממשלת בנט-לפיד לאמון הכנסת. If you read the news, especially commercial news in Israel, we love drama. Just like news anywhere else, we got to sell it. We got to sell it to advertisers, and we got to sell it to subscribers. So if you read the news, commercial news in Israel, it's a lot of, as we say in 2022, a lot of doom scrolling. We focus on a lot of drama, focus on a lot of negatives. Here, they're trying to be as objective as possible, mainly because this is a government website. And what it says here is Hayom Yom Huledet. Today is the birthday. Literally, today is the birthday. This is, by the way, the beginning of how we sing happy birthday in Hebrew. Yes, there is the Hebraicized version of the English happy birthday song, but there's also the Israeli song, Hayom Yom Huledet. Hayom Yom Huledet. You've probably been in a restaurant and heard this before, if not with your kids or grandkids, but certainly in restaurants when someone's celebrating a birthday, you'll hear this. This is how it begins when you sing happy birthday to someone in Hebrew in Israeli context. Hayom Yom Huledet, colon. Hayom Lifnei Shana, today, Lifnei Shana. Remember we had that Lifnei construct before that meant ago? Same thing here. Hayom Lifnei Shana, 1 year ago today. Lifnei Shana is 1 year ago. Hayom today. Be, 13 ביוני, 2021, on the 13th of June 2021, זכתה ממשלת בנט-לפיד לאמון הכנסת. זכתה is our next word here. Achieved, awarded, or gained. It comes from the same root as zchut, which means a right, like a legal right. Zikui, which means credit. Liskot means to win. Zchia is winning or winner. And from all this, we get the same meaning from achievement, awarded, gained. And it's talking about Zachta Memshelet Bennett-Lapid. It is talking about the current government, that the Bennett-Lapid government, because remember we have a rotation of prime ministers, and so it's known by the two, the current and the alternate prime minister. Is the term that we use both in Hebrew and English for this. The Bennett-Lapid government, Zachta, because remember it's news, so the verb came first, Zachta Memshelet Bennett-Lapid, Le'emun HaKnesset, that the Bennett-Lapid government was awarded or achieved what? Le'emun HaKnesset, achieved the Knesset's confidence. Our next word here, the Knesset's confidence. Remember, in Israel, we have a parliamentary democracy, and everything has to be voted, almost everything has to be voted through the Knesset, including the swearing in of a government, which is why it's so important to have at least one more than half of the total Knesset members. So if there's 120 Knesset members, you need at least 61 to have a stable government, but also you need more than 60, at least 61 to ensure that when you vote in the government, because that has to happen after elections and after the whole coalition coming together fun happens, you have to vote in the government. And so there has to be emun ba'knesset. Emun ha'knesset has to be given to the government. The Knesset's confidence, the 120 members of Knesset have to give their emun, confidence, to the government. And that's what they're talking about here. So it's saying that 1 year ago today, this government was effectively sworn in. It was given the Knesset's confidence. Okay? It's a very nice way to say it, as opposed to the way some news outlets are saying, whether on left or right. Certainly commercial ones are talking about just finding the next thing necessarily to go after, and there are legitimate reasons to look at that, but the point is it's focusing on its 1-year anniversary of being in power. Okay, let's keep going. שרי השיכון, האוצר והפנים הציגו אתמול תוכנית שמטרתה טיפול במשבר הדיור והורדת מחירי הדירות. Okay, שרי השיכון, האוצר והפנים. We've talked about this before. A sar or sar is a minister in modern Hebrew. In this case, it's what ministers of government ministries? Hashikun, ha'otzar, ve'hapnim. Shikun, housing. Otzar, treasury, meaning commerce, meaning finance, but it's really focusing on finance. Ve'hapnim, interior. Okay, so the ministers of the building, of the housing, finance, and interior ministries, all government ministers, hitzigu etmol, presented, hitzigu, they presented, etmol, yesterday, tochnit is a plan, tochnit is a plan in general, but it's saying that these three ministers presented a plan yesterday, shematrata, again, this is a word that has three different components, just like we had before, shematrata, asher hamatrata shela. Okay, the she is a prefix standing for asher. You know this one a lot. This means that or which at the beginning of a word is she. Matara is its purpose. Matarata is a purpose or its goal, but it's really a purpose in this case. Matrata, that extra a at the end, that ta at the end stands for shela. She matrata, asher hamatara shela. Whose purpose? Okay, all of that stands for whose purpose. Shematrata, the tochnit, it's referring to the tochnit. Shematrata, because tochnit is a feminine word, it's ta at the end. Whose purpose is tipul b'mashber hadiur. Tipul is treatment or taking care of something. Mashber hadiur is our next term here. Mashber is a crisis. Diur is housing. Okay, so mashber hadiur, the housing crisis. Horadat mechirei hadirot. Lehorid is to lessen or to decrease something. In this case, horadat what? Mechirei hadirot. Mechir is a price. Dirot are apartments. So the three government ministers from the housing, finance, and interior ministries met, Sigu presented yesterday a plan whose purpose is the treatment or the taking care of the mashber hadiur, the housing crisis, ve'horadat mechirei hadirot, and reducing the cost of apartments. Okay, that is that one sentence there, that one headline. Let's keep going. הנשיא ביידן צפוי לבקר בישראל ככל הנראה ב-14 ביולי. Okay, הנשיא Biden. This is a very fancy way to say Nasi Biden because it's President Biden referring to him in a with the article ha, the definite article. So it's President Biden, making sure it's not just any President Biden, it's referring to the United States President Biden. Okay, צפוי, expected. Levaker be'Israel is expected to visit Israel. Kechol hanireh, this is our next word here. Okay, kechol hanireh is just like lifnei ke is another time expression. This is another one that's very good. Kechol hanireh is best translated as apparently, probably, or in all likelihood. It's not finalized, it's not confirmed, but in all likelihood, something is going to happen. In this case, that President Biden is going to visit Israel on the 14th of July. Okay, this, by the way, has changed multiple times in the last few hours, in the last few days. So this is as of 6 in the morning today. Okay. So again, we're not focusing on all the words here. We're focusing on the words both they want you to know, as you can tell by where the vowel sounds, and the words I think are important for you to know because these words come up again and again in the news. Let's go through some other ones together, and then I want to take your questions. Ukraina. המלחמה נמשכת ולא רואים את הסוף. This is an interesting headline because there isn't much, unfortunately, here to report, but good that at least they are reporting it. Ukraina is how we say in modern Hebrew, Ukraine. המלחמה נמשכת, the war, נמשכת, continues. This is also the passive tense, but we translate it into English as continues. Persists is another way to translate it. ולא רואים את הסוף. And the end is not in sight, or we don't see the end of it. לא רואים. This is like asking, how do you say a word in Hebrew? איך אומרים end בעברית. Okay, איך אומרים? When you see the לא רואים here, it's the general consensus, or it's the general population that's being referred to. Okay, אוקראינה, המלחמה נמשכת ולא רואים את הסוף. This would be like how in English we would say one doesn't, or one, referring to in a general sense, and not specifying who's the speaker, who's doing the thinking or the action here. So Ukraine, the war continues, the war persists, and one doesn't see its end, or one doesn't see the end. Okay, it's not referring to we at Hadshon or we in Israel, it's just referring in general. One doesn't see its end. That's why it's in plural here, to be as general and as collective as possible. Okay, the next few are about Corona, which is why I didn't write out the words, because we have covered Corona in the past. So those of you who are going to potentially jump on me for not translating this part, we are going to translate it orally. I just didn't write these out. You can find all of our previous lessons on youtube.com, but specifically about Corona, they definitely are there as well as many other vocab lists online. I just want to go through these to also to highlight some important news words here. מגפת הקורונה בישראל, מקדם ההדבקה ה-R עלה ל-1.44. Okay, so מגפת הקורונה בישראל. מגפה, we've talked about this before, is a pandemic. It literally means an older Hebrew plague. It also means that in modern Hebrew, but we're talking about a pandemic. And how do we refer to it in Hebrew? Not COVID, we say corona. Okay, it's not that people won't understand you when they say COVID, but we do say corona here in Israel much more frequently. In fact, in the news, that's what we use. So magefat ha-corona b'Yisrael, the corona pandemic in Israel, מקדם ההדבקה ה-R עלה ל-1.44. Many of you know the R factor, I just lost the literal translation, the scientific foundation. This is the rate of infection. Right? Rate stands for R, but mikadem hadbaka. Mikadem comes from likadem, to advance. Hadbaka is infection. So the rate of infection stands at 1.44. You all know what this means. I'm not going to go into the scientific parts, but it's just to point out that after many, many months of being below 1.0, which is considered where it should be, it's now above 1.0 at 1.44. And you heard, by the way, how she said it, a decimal. We're going to go to that again. We've done mathematics in the past here on Cafe Oleh, but 1.44. You read it left to right. So 1.44, just like we would say in English. Next one is also about Corona. תוצאות ראשונות של מחקר בשיבא. מי שחלה באומיקרון וגם חוסן מפני קורונה, מוגן יותר מפני הזן החדש. Okay. תוצאות ראשונות, the first results, תוצאות are results, ראשונות first, של מחקר בשיבא. מחקר is research. Shiba refers to the hospital named Shiba, also known in Israel as Tel Shomer. Remember, this is for an Israeli audience and people living in Israel. So it doesn't have to detail what it means when it says Shiba, because it's understood. If you're in Israel, you know what Shiba is. Shiba is one of the biggest hospitals in Israel. It's also known as Tel Shomer. It's just outside of Tel Aviv. It's a massive complex that's also a research hospital. So the first results of research at Shiba Hospital. מי שחלה באומיקרון וגם חוסן מפני קורונה. מי שחלה, who that has fallen ill, chala, like chole, sick, who has fallen ill ba-Omicron, who has fallen sick of the Omicron variant of corona, vegam chusan. Remember that hutar, sukal, now we have chusan, another passive verb. Vegam chusan mipnei corona, and was vaccinated against corona. Okay, so whoever fell ill of corona, of the Omicron variant, and was also vaccinated, doesn't matter before or after, in this case, at least in the context of this headline, mugan, again, another passive verb, mugan, is defended, yoter mipnei hazan hadash. Put this all together. The first results of a research at Sheba, those who have fallen ill of the Omicron variant and Husan and were vaccinated against corona were more protected, mugan yoter, were more protected, mipnei hazan hadash, were more protected against the new variant. Okay, that's simply the headline. Next one, Misrad HaBriut, Health Ministry, mamlitz, recommends, lemevugarim ula'ochlosiyot basikun. Mevugarim is a nice way to say senior citizens. It literally means older adults, or mature adults is a better way to say it, but it means senior citizens. Lemevugarim ula'ochlosiyot basikun, and for populations, ochlosiyot are populations, basikun, at risk. Okay, so the what are they recommending to senior citizens and populations at risk, meaning people with health issues, because it's from the health ministry? La'atot masechot b'chalalim skurim uvehit kahaluyot. Okay, so again, look at the words that are given the dots and bars, the nikud. These are the words they both want you to focus on, that could be pronounced differently and also maybe hard to pronounce. And we're going to get to that big one at the end in a second. So what are they recommending? Misrad HaBriut, la'atot masechot. We've talked about this before. The verb that goes with wearing a mask is la'atot. La'atot masecha, to wear a mask. Okay, so to wear a mask, bechalalim skurim, in enclosed spaces. Chalal is space, both space, outer space, but also a large space. So it's recommending that senior citizens and populations at risk, those with health issues, to wear a mask, bechalalim skurim, in enclosed spaces. Uvehit kahaluyot. This is a hard word. Hebrew typically doesn't have words with this many syllables. Uvehit kahaluyot. 7 is very rare, and that's why it has vowels here. You'll see this. And in congregations, meaning in large assembly of people, and groups is what it's referring to. So the health ministry is recommending senior citizens and those at risk to wear masks in enclosed spaces and in large groups. Okay, and then the last one, atachazit, the weather forecast, yirida b'temperaturot. Yirida, we had that word horada before, to decrease something, to lower something. Yirida is a decrease, b'temperaturot, in temperatures. Okay, so all together, we went through the highlights of the news from the previous day and the upcoming day, meaning today, on this website, Hadshon. It's a great resource. I highly recommend going to it yourself. We're going to publish the website again when this particular video goes up on YouTube in the next few days. Just go to youtube.com, type in Nefesh B'Nefesh, or type in Cafe Olay. You'll see a playlist of all of our previous sessions. This one will be up there. You'll get the link to this. This is all around a really great website, especially for those of you who don't want to be glued to the news and want an easy way to access the news, and also to hear how it sounds and to work on your vocabulary. Okay, let me stop here and answer some questions. Anonymous asks, what is Beit Sefer Tichon? Is that high school? Yes. Remember, I only read aloud for the itzumim b'ma'arechet hachinuch, that the labor sanctions in the education ministry only refer to ganei yeladim, batei sefer yesodiyim, uvachativot beinaim. It only refers to kindergartens, elementary schools and junior high schools or middle schools. Beit Sefer Tichon, high school. Okay. Zoe asked a great question. Why is feminine form for Mimshelet when Lapid is male? Mimshelet Lapid, Bennett Lapid. Great question. Mimshelet is this is actually a compound word. How do I know this? Because the word for government in Hebrew, specifically a sworn-in government, an existing government, not the idea of government. The idea of government is memshal, right? Someone who studies government they're studying memshal, but an actual sworn-in government is memshala. Okay, a slight difference, but an important difference. Memshala is a feminine word. Bennett Lapid is referring to a specific government, the existing government in the state of Israel. And therefore, this is a compound word. It's two nouns together, Memshala, which is a noun meaning government, and Bennett Lapid, the name of this government that they have used here to signify the two alternate prime ministers. Right, so it has nothing to do with the gender of Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. It has everything to do with Memshala is a feminine word. So in a compound word, a word that the first word that begins with a hey turns into a taf. So instead of Memshala, it's Mimshelet. Okay, I could simply say HaMimshala shel Bennett Lapid. That would be the way to get around this. There would be no confusion here. But again, Hebrew likes conciseness. It likes fewer words and fewer syllables as possible. So Mimshelet Bennett Lapid is the same exact thing as saying HaMimshala shel Bennett Lapid. Okay, it's actually even more condensed because this is just like in English, putting two compound words here. So the Bennett Lapid government, as opposed to the government of Bennett Lapid, which would, if we used shel. So Mimshelet Bennett Lapid, it turns into Mimshelet because Mimshala is a feminine word. It has nothing to do with anything that comes after that. Great question. It could, by the way, be female prime ministers after that. It could be even more people than two. It would not change. Or if it could be one man, it would still be Mimshelet, feminine. Great question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, I'm seeing some random Hebrew questions, and if you have a little time at the end, happy to answer those. But folks, I love you, and I'm pretty good at Hebrew, but I'm not a human dictionary. A lot of these words that you're asking about, you can also look up on your own. Elisheva asks a great question. There's a department store called Mashbir, certainly not crisis. Great question. Elisheva, it's Mashbir is the name of the store. It's also called Hamashbir Letzalchan. And it comes from an old-fashioned way about how goods were distributed in Israel. We don't use that term mashbir anymore, but it's mashbir with a yud and it's a e sound, not mashber. Mashber is is a crisis. Mashbir is not a crisis. Mashbir is the name of that store. Hamashbir Letzalchan. It's a department store. Remember, folks, you can't skip around with spelling or with pronunciation in Hebrew. So mashber is crisis. Mashbir is the name of a store. Mashber, mashbir. Okay, it may sound like a nuance, but it's a big nuance. Okay, Diane asked, Teudat Zehut. Zehut from one of the words you mentioned earlier. I don't remember saying Zehut before, but Zehut with a hey means identity. Teudat Zehut is what we call our national IDs here in Israel. It literally translates to identity document or identity certificate. That is the national ID that by law, all Israeli citizens must carry on them. Surprise newsflash, folks, if you didn't know that, by law, you do have to have your Teudat Zehut on you at all time. Just saying. It also refers to your number, even though Mispar Zihui is referring to your 9-digit national ID number. Teudat Zehut can both be the card, but also your 9-digit personal number. Sanford asks two interesting, unrelated words, but why not Sanford? We have a little bit of time left. How to say abstain from voting? Lehimana milahatzbia. Those, if you are following the Knesset when they have a vote in the plenary session, you have three options, just like you do in other places. Ba'ad, neged, nimna. Ba'ad, you're for. You're voting for whatever bill is being passed. Neged, against, so you are against whatever bill you're doing. And nimna. Nimna is nun mem nun ayin, means abstain. Lehimana is to abstain. So nimna milahatzbia, abstains from voting. Okay, and monkeypox. Because we need another health scare, folks, right? The way you say monkeypox in Hebrew, aba'abuot kofim. Aba'abua is a pox, and kofim, monkeys. Or it's aba'abuot kof or kofim, something like that. Don't worry about monkeypox, folks. Got enough to worry about. Lawrence asks, by the way, you can carry your driver's license instead of your tudatsu. Great point, Lawrence. Yes, if you do have a rishayon nehiga, a driver's license in Hebrew, you absolutely must. You can carry that as well. The point, though, is, folks, in the state of Israel, you must have a nationally distributed form of ID on you at all times. By law, it's a remnant of the British mandates emergency laws, that you could be arrested on the spot, and technically you still can in the state of Israel if you don't carry some form of nationally accrued ID. So in that case, it's your Teudat Zehut, which everyone has, a Rishayon Nehiga, a driver's license that not everyone has, a passport, Dalkon, or if you're a soldier, a Teudat Chogel. Okay, but good point, Lawrence. Thank you for giving it. Okay. Looks like we are at the top of the hour. Toda rabah, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. As always, this class will be up on YouTube in the next 1 to 2 days, so look up for it if you'd like to follow along. We will be back next week, 8 o'clock Israel time, for our next lesson, and we're going to be talking about the latest words that have been added to the Hebrew language, as well as some even more new unofficial words with slang, but we're going to look at the newest entries into the Hebrew language next week and what's all the hype about them. So until then, toda rabah, thank you all so much, and lehitraot, see you all very soon.